Welcome to episode 4 of the Big Story podcast. This August, India's economic weather turned stormy. US President Donald Trump slapped an additional 25% tariff on all Indian exports to America. On paper, it's a simple number. In reality, it promises to double effective tariffs on India to about 50% and threatens the lifeline of India's biggest export market. The move puts India in a bind. Should it swallow the short term pain and hold its ground, or make concessions to get the tariffs dropped at the risk of long term vulnerability? That's what we're exploring today. And to take us through the numbers, the politics, and the hidden costs, I'm joined by M Rajshekhar, the author of our latest big story, How Should India Respond to Trump's Tariff Shock? Hi, Shekhar.
It's good to be here.
Let's start right at the top. So, what exactly did Trump announce and how big a deal is it?
Well, you said this in the introductory remarks, really, right? That when on Liberation Day, India was hit by that provisional tariff of 26%, we were negotiating to bring it down because 26% is very high. All of a sudden, it felt as though India-US relations have taken a nosedive because we got hit by 25%. And then thereafter, another 25%, which is going to kick in soon for us trading with Russia for oil. So 50%. And as we know, right, I mean, we've all been looking at the rise of China. No country can have a tariff of 50% and hope to be competitive in any kind of an export industry. So that's where we are.
So now he's given India a 21-day window before these tariffs take effect. So is that just, is there a chance that this is just a negotiating tactic from the US?
So that is the subject of much speculation right now. People will say that Trump always chickens out, this is his way of driving a deal, whatever. But I asked this question to an investment banker in a global FII last week. And his reading was that this is not a negotiating tactic. What he had been told by his sources in the government is that a trade deal was very, very close to finalization. And then something happened, possibly Operation Sindoor and the disagreement between India and China and US in terms of who brokered the peace. But something happened around that time, and the tenor of these discussions changed dramatically. So, and there was again sort of something else that I was reading where it was said that the US cannot take on China directly. They hold too many economic cards. They cannot sort of take on Russia directly either. India, however, is a softer target. So if you want to show the world that you're a strong, decisive leader, India is very much a country that you can sort of try and squeeze. So it's hard to predict in our time. You have a very volatile president in the United States, but this doesn't feel like a negotiating tactic purely. This could be around for a while.
So we've seen Trump use this strategy with other countries such as Indonesia. So can you just take us through what this pattern is, the pattern that is emerging here?
So much of it makes me think of colonialism. The deal that they have. So one thing that we've been hearing about for a very long time is that with each of these trade negotiations, the US is going to force countries to buy more from the US. Typically, that will be energy. Typically, that will be defense. And some time back, we were talking to Jayati Ghosh, and she was saying that, we have to look beyond these headline announcements because there's a lot of fine print, which is very, very shocking. In the case of Indonesia, what you find is, indeed, there is a purchase of weapon systems, there is energy purchases. What Trump has also managed is, while he will have a 19% tariff on Indonesian goods entering the US, American goods entering Indonesia will have a 0% tariff. Effectively, any Indonesian firm manufacturing those goods or importers from other countries are going to struggle to compete against imports from America. In addition to that, what you also have is a waiver for from environmental laws, safety standards for anything coming from the US. When I had spoken to her about a month ago, Dr. Ghosh was alluding to some of this, saying that this is fundamental to the new economic agreements that are being signed. She had mentioned the UK FTA with India, saying that pharma companies have won a very, very large concession instead of having compulsory licensing, where once the patent expires on a particular drug formulation, generic manufacturers can pick that up and make it here, without any additional permissions being needed. The UK FDA now says that India has to uh, move, wants India to move to a voluntary sort of a regime where the original IP owner, the pharma firm, decides and determines the terms on which generic manufacturers can access their formulation. How much can they make? Who can they sell to? What price? All of that. In these ways, what you're finding is something which keeps making me think of the colonial period, where the new trade relations which are being created are where the new trade relations which are being created are all extremely asymmetric. Logically, if it made sense for India to buy oil from the US, we would have, if it was an economically sensible thing to do. We know it's not. It's too far away a market for a start. And shale is a very, very expensive form of oil and gas. But we are now being forced to buy those. In the same way that we are going to be signing away the future of several industries like, as in the case of the UK FTA, pharma. So you are starting to see something that we don't understand very well yet. There is a new arrangement coming in where countries in the West are trying to create fairly asymmetric trade relations, which to some extent also mean that countries like ours cannot grow in several critical sectors. And some of that subtext has to be kept in mind. So when you were saying up earlier that there is going to be short-term pain, but that short-term pain has to be counterbalanced with the long-term costs. So that is roughly where we are.
So let's talk a little bit about the short-term pains. What kind of concessions you have mentioned? Of course, energy, pharma, defense. So can we speak a bit more about what exactly India will have to agree to if it goes down the Indonesia path?
The US was putting a lot of pressure on India to buy F 35s, fighter planes. These are expensive, A, compared to other fighter planes. More importantly for India, we already have fighter planes from 5 different countries. And in connection with another report, I've been talking to people in the defense sector. And what they say is that the last thing we need today is fighter planes from a sixth country, because your back end in terms of spares, supplies, gets that much more complicated. To come to a more familiar turf to us, which is that of energy, Carbon Copy has been talking about how imported gas it's not a very good bridge fuel for India. Uh, it struggles, it is costlier than any of the fuels it seeks to replace. What you're getting here is not even gas from Qatar or the Middle East. We are talking about getting gas all the way from the US. And early last year, Carbon Copy had a report on a firm called Tellurian. This was a deal where the US wanted India to sign a 40-year agreement to buy LNG from a shale gas manufacturer called Tellurian, uh, where the effective price would have been $6 per MMBTU. The spot market price for gas at that time was $2. So you're effectively paying a surplus of $4 in addition to taking equity in Tellurian, which basically means that at a time when there are gas export terminals coming up across the world, we, for some reason, are taking equity in one of those gas terminals instead of simply shopping between them for the best price. So we've done these calculations trying to figure out what the total cost of this project would be, of this investment would be. And I think we had ended up with a number of 560,000 crores over 40 years. This is the kind of deals we don't want to get into. For a developing country, 560,000 crores invested elsewhere is phenomenally. You can imagine what the opportunity cost of that would be. And for the same reason, right? In the case of India, a very, very key area where the US wants concessions is agricultural produce and dairy. That employs more than half of the country. So if you suddenly start exposing Indian farmers to heavily subsidized oil seeds or dairy, our guys cannot compete. And a country already struggling with joblessness, underemployment, poverty. These are, uh, I mean, the only analogy I can think of is uh, the textile trade under the British, where the Indian growers, cotton growers, were hammered, and we were getting in garments from outside. The scale of devastation and precarity would be the same.
Right. So now, given these risks, what are the alternatives? Can India diversify trade like Mexico and Brazil have done? What choices are we left with?
I honestly don't see any choice. There is one possibility that, maybe Trump changes his mind. Okay, and I think that's a thinking within a part of the government that let's not do anything, let's wait for a year. Let's not rush to make some commitment that we are then held to for the next 40 years. Let's wait it out. Let's wait to see what happens with his talks with Russia, what happens in the US midterm polls next year. Let's wait and watch. Let's not rush into anything. Uh, in the meantime, I think the policymakers are also thinking that it makes sense for India to widen its export basket. There are intrinsic strengths in this economy of ours. Cipla showed us what those could be, right? When it began sort of manufacturing cheap generics for the rest of the developing world. The Indian market is one where given that our market is a lower middle class market in terms of numbers, it logically means that we make products which would be of interest and use to most countries across the world. Maybe those are the opportunities to tap. There is a problem here, which is that the US consumer market is way bigger than all these other markets that we'll be trying to tap into. Instead of taking care of one big market, we'll have to look at 40 different markets to generate perhaps equivalent volume. But, and those are additionally markets where China has a huge head start, and yet we really don't have a choice. The thing that we can do is invest more in our domestic market, get scale from domestic demand, and then start expanding into other countries. But I think that's a better position to take than to sort of panic and rush into detent with the US and end up making some agreement that we are then stuck with for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
But India is making some moves, right? After this story was published, we now know that Prime Minister Modi will be visiting China. Can you talk us through what those moves could mean? What is India trying to do here?
These are very welcome steps. If you were to sort of just put the US economy and the Chinese economy side by side, it's very, very clear which of these is going to be growing faster in the years to come. Right? We have to make sure that we are choosing our alignments and our partners very carefully. In that sense, trying to sort of, broker peace with China as opposed to trying to act as a military ally of the US against China. Uh, I don't think the latter is a very smart strategy. Mending bridges with China is, and sort of, getting into a arrangement where both the countries are growing together would probably make the world a great deal more stable.
So, what is the bottom line here? These tariffs, are they a crisis or an opportunity for India?
They are both. The question is, can we sort of take the short term pain? Sectors like textiles, gems and jewelry, etc., are extremely labor intensive. So, can we do something imaginative, the way we did when Satyam went down, and sort of limit the pain those sectors will go through? At the same time, how do we benefit from this arrangement? I mean, this is what a bunch of countries, developing countries, have been saying, that this is a moment when we can actually reimagine our trade relations with the rest of the world. This is that moment for us. We've been speaking about the need to revitalize the country's manufacturing sector for a while and to retool it away from a heavily consumerist market to uh, more bread and butter markets or bottom of pyramid markets might actually uh, help India's MSME sector grow faster too. It predominantly caters to small enterprises and middle class households. We might even have, and we know that China is also moving up the value chain in several markets. we have it. I think we have opportunities here that we should really look at a little more carefully. So this is life, right? I mean, much of it is really about how you respond to situations as they emerge.
That's where we leave it. Trump's tariff shock is more than a trade dispute, it's a stress test for India's economic diplomacy and its political will. The choices the country makes now will tell us whether we're building a trade policy for the next quarter or for the next generation. Thanks, Rajshekhar, for joining us. You can read the entire story in the link provided below. Stay tuned for episode 5.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.